I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler. Coming up on Football Today. On Saturday, Vissel Kobe and Yokohama F Marinos played a 3-3 thriller in the Japanese Super Cup. The game went into penalties, and at one point, the two teams missed 9 penalties in a row.
He's won trophies in 4 countries. For Marlon! Over the bar! Even he cannot do it! Nobody able to get the ball in from the penalty spot.
But the game wasn't the only entertainment to excite fans that day. With the new season around the corner, we ask, what is the mascot election and what does it tell us about the J-League?
This is very much like a Super Cup thing, and I was telling actually an American friend who lives in Germany and writes about the Bundesliga. I brought him along, and I was telling him that it's more like in the US, like an all-star game.
Dan Orlowitz covers Japanese football for the Japan Times.
It's not about 2 teams, it's about celebrating the J-League's culture as a whole, and that's something that the Super Cup does that's very unique, even though the game itself is basically meaningless.
So you took your friend who had never been to it before. Kind of, what did he think of the whole thing?
He loved it. It was an incredible experience because you have 2 very good fan bases. You have the stage of the Super Cup, which is something that recognizes not just the 2 teams who are playing, but all 50-plus teams in the league, not just in terms of having the mascots there, for example, but in the food park areas outside of the stadium, there's a food truck from every J-League team, which is something else that the Super Cup does, where they all send sort of one of their most famous or well-known or popular food items to be sold. And so you can really see sort of which stadium has the most popular, we call it stadium gourmet, essentially, what has the most popular stadium food by how long the lines are. And you have things like there was a display of all the 50-something uniforms. You had various fan meetups. And so overall, it's a J-League festival, essentially. It's the same as, for example, the MLS All-Star Game, in that it showcases the league and not just a couple of the good teams.
Interesting. So you're saying that, they have all of these different stadium food trucks at this game. What type of food are some of these food trucks exhibiting?
You have chanko nabe, which is a type of soup, sort of a stew of sorts, that is traditionally eaten by sumo wrestlers, and they serve that at Todoroki Stadium, where Kawasaki Frontale play. You have sort of karage, like fried chicken, which Shonan Bamare have a very popular booth that actually I make a point of getting chicken from there every time I cover one of their games. Various curry, kebabs, which obviously aren't a Japanese food, dumplings from Yokohama F Marinos because they're very close to Chinatown, takoyaki, octopus balls from Gamba, Osaka, where that's sort of one of the most well-known foods. All these sorts of different regional foods, not just popular foods that are popular at those respective stadiums, but foods that represent the hometown, that represent the region. And it's very unique because it highlights how the J-League isn't just sort of you go to a stadium and then there's fish and chips or there's popcorn or there's whatever. When you eat at these stadium food trucks, you are experiencing the local culture.
You could have a real tourism experience just in the stadium.
Yeah, and when you look at some of the teams that have really strong away followings, for example, FC Tokyo's supporters are known as locusts because they travel in great numbers, they go just about anywhere, and they will devour anything they see.
Okay, so, you take your friend to the Super Cup, and it's, as you described, kind of a Japanese, football festival, if you will. But one of the things that makes it so unique and so interesting, at least to me, is they have this Mascot Cup or Mascot Election. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what that is?
The Mascot Election is a popularity contest. Just every year they have to decide who the J-League's most popular mascot is. The only thing at stake is bragging rights, and whoever wins gets to pose in the center of the big group photo they take of all the mascots, and fans really care about it. You'll have big sort of organic get out the vote campaigns. This year, the club sponsors at some clubs really got involved in reaching out to their customers and saying, hey, we sponsor this club, their mascots in the election, go and vote for them on the website and in the app and that sort of thing.
But, why are they so invested in this? It might not make sense to people back in the United States or in England where mascots are somewhat relevant, but not really that big of a deal necessarily.
I think that in Japan, obviously there's an affinity for mascots, and it's just sort of something that's... They represent the club in such a way that is embraced not only by kids, but by adult fans. The mascots are a point of pride, and it's really hard to describe unless you're here and then you go to a game and the mascot will be out in the concourse before a match, and adults will be lining up for photos, kids will be lining up for photos, and mascots are just one way that clubs perform community outreach. So they'll go to events and they'll go to various things to promote the club, and it really depends on the club because each club sort of has different mascot circumstances, but they're just sort of a part of the landscape, and they always have been.
Can you just tell the audience when and why this mascot election started in the first place?
So the first year of the mascot election was in 2013, and around then there was a boom of popularity elections, and that boom was inspired by the J-pop idol group AKB48. Now, AKB48 is a J-pop group. They have 150 or 200 members. At the time, they had about 48 members, and the way that they would... Gosh, this all sounds so stupid when I'm recording it. It's all so ridiculous. So how AKB48 capitalized on this very lucrative market of J-pop idol fandom was elections, where if you bought a single, you would get a code in the CD or whatever to vote. And the winner of this election got to be the lead vocalist on the next single. Now, this means that if you have 48 singers, they all have their individual fans, and those fans are going to go out and buy a lot of CDs to make sure that their favorite gets elected.
So how did this translate to the mascots in football?
It was a trend. I think AKB did it for years, and you had other groups doing similar, just 3 letters and 2 numbers, became a clever way of marketing. And the idea of having these sorts of elections and popularity contests became a way to generate engagement and draw attention to whatever it was. There were government bodies doing sort of AKB48 spin-off type things, all sorts of weird stuff, and that's where it came from. It was just a way for the J-League to generate excitement for the Super Cup and to get all of the mascots in one place, because one unique thing about the Super Cup is that all of the mascots are there. And this year, about 350 fans could buy tickets that would allow them to meet all of the mascots before the match. And that's not something you can do every day. And those tickets are always the first to sell out for the Super Cup every year, without question.
So just how many of these mascots are there in Japanese football?
If you're including all Japanese mascots, because some clubs have more than one, they'll have the brother and sister, or the family, or the relatives. I don't know if any of the clubs with both male and female mascots have like couples. I don't know if any of them are dating, but if you add all of those up, you're getting well into the 60s and maybe even 70s. As far as this mascot election, there were 53 participants, including the J-League, which has its own mascot, J-League King. A couple clubs don't have mascots. For example, FC Imabari, which joined the J3 this season, does not have a mascot yet, but that's something that they're going to be working on, because mascots equal revenue for a lot of these clubs, not just in terms of drawing kids and attracting new fans, but for the merchandising. A good mascot will have cross-club appeal, not just appealing to fans of that club, but also to fans of other clubs.
So you could be a fan of one club, but still love a mascot of another.
Absolutely. You look at Vivi-kun at Vivare Nagasaki, and he is arguably the cutest mascot in the league. And everyone loves him. The plush toys always sell out. They've had supply issues for years trying to keep those in stock. And others like Tokyo Dorompa, who's sort of based on the Tanuki, is FC Tokyo's mascot. And he came around, I believe it was 2008 or 2009. And since then, he's always been very popular. Can breakdance, can ride a unicycle, can do like lifting with the ball, acrobatic. That sort of more American style, I guess like NBA style mascot in a way, where you're not just sort of walking around and posing for photos with the kids, but you're also getting out there and doing like performances.
I think one of the other things I found interesting was that they don't just have animal mascots like they do in the States or in England. They have items as well. I think I saw a paper crane one and all sorts of different types of non-animal mascots, which is a bit odd.
Yeah, the paper crane, his name is Hizuru, and he belongs to Iwate Grula Morioka. And that, the costume was actually funded. I believe they used a crowdfunding campaign to make that mascot a reality. You have Sanupi, who's the mascot of Kamatamare Sanuki, and he's sort of this a kid with a bowl of udon noodles on his head.
Wait, so it's a hungry kid?
It's a kid whose head is a bowl of noodles. You have Ehime FC, which is on the island of Shikoku. That area is known for orange juice, and so they have a trio of orange mascots. Not just the color orange, the fruit. And Io Kanto was this year's representative. And really, the mascots take inspiration from everything. Local animals, mythology, folklore, and each club, for better or for worse, has a mascot that is uniquely their own.
So, getting back to the Super Cup, which mascot won?
In the end, Yokohama F Marinos mascot Marinosuke pulled it off for his first mascot election win. He defeated Grampus-kun of Nagoya Grampus, who won the last two tournaments and came in second this time around, and then Vivi-kun was in third, which is punching way above his weight class. You think about a club like Nagasaki, and their following isn't huge, but the fact that Vivi-kun is always in the running shows just how popular he is, where he can run with the J1 teams that have very strong fan bases, and so they can mobilize a lot of fans to vote if they choose. But Marinosuke's victory, very well deserved, coming off of Marinos' J1 win, their first in 15 years. They've got a lot of momentum going for them as a club, and their marketing is great, and they pulled it off.
What makes a mascot win or do so well in the competition?
I think it's in the design, first of all. It is in how well the mascot interacts with the fans before and after the game, what sort of promotions they do, what sort of merchandise they have, how accessible they are.
if we kind of zoom out a little bit, it seems like this is part of Japanese society a bit. I know that they have their own mascot Grand Prix.
Yes, the Grand Prix has been going around on for years and years. People know it as like the event where Kumamon really gained public consciousness. There have been mascot controversies where I think Nara Prefecture had 3 dueling mascots, and they had a Geneva Convention to sort it out. That is absolutely true. I'm not making that up. And the Grand Prix is more for municipality mascots, cities, prefectures, regions. They don't have sports mascots, for example. I think that you and a lot of your listeners have probably heard the John Oliver segment on Japanese mascots, and as he showed in that segment, I mean, every company, every organization has a mascot.
There is something amazing happening over there right now. As we've discussed before, Japan is home to thousands of mascots for everything from museums to prisons to entire towns and cities. You may remember, we loved that idea so much that we actually made our own unofficial mascots for various US government agencies. Well,
not only because it's sort of a safe way to promote the brand and disseminate information, but because every company, every municipality out there thinks that if they have something like Kumamon, they can make a lot of money.
What makes it so special to you? Why are you so into it?
It's fun. I think if you've lived in Japan as long as I have, at this recording 13 years plus, you sort of just learn to enjoy it. And it is part of Japanese culture in a way, and it is one of those things that is such a unique part of the J-League that makes it so different from any other league in the world. Other leagues have mascots, but no league loves its mascots as purely and unironically as the J-League.
I want to branch this out a little bit to the rest of Japanese matchday culture. So mascots are one way that the J-League differentiates themselves. How else is the Japanese matchday culture different than elsewhere?
I think that if you look at the Super Cup, it sort of encapsulates everything the J-League is about. You have the mascots, yes, so you have the food, which is a big part, the different items and the different ways that the clubs connect with the local community are selling points. Ground hopping tourism is a major selling point of the league. If you look at the demographics of who's attending J-League games, 37.6% are women, and that's an insane number that no country in the world can match, and that reflects how the J-League presents this fun matchday experience that people of any age and gender can go and enjoy.
Why do you think that number is so high?
It's a safe league. I mean, you're not worried about getting killed by hooligans. You're not dealing with just rows of motorcycle and mounted policemen on the way to the stadium. 2 sets of fans can take the same train into the stadium and take the same train going back. It's just the way that the league has always been. It's a family-friendly environment, and that's just not something that a lot of leagues in Europe and elsewhere can really offer.
And of course, you said that there are some matchday activities and events that are particularly interesting as well. What are some examples of those?
The examples that I always give when I'm asked about matchday events are usually from Kawasaki Frontale, just because they had one of the best matchday sort of planners in the country. And Kawasaki had this guy named Haruka Amano, and he worked on the 2002 World Cup, and then he joined Kawasaki, and he did things like coming up with the It's a Sumo World promotion, where they worked with sumo wrestlers. They have a little ring set up outside the stadium where they have demos and like little sparring bouts. They do all of the match day promotions in the style of sumo promotions. They get the guy who does the announcements at sumo tournaments to introduced the starting lineups. All the graphics on the Jumbotrons are like sumo style. Like, it's very cool. It's something that, for example, US football fans would be comfortable with because American sports teams will do theme nights and whatever. But the Japanese fans buy into it very unironically. And it's like these are destination matches. Kawasaki did this tie-up with JAXA, the Japanese version of NASA, where they had Kengo Nakamura, absolute legend, club legend, national team legend. He spoke with astronaut Takuya Onishi on the International Space Station. They connected him via video link, like after the game, and they had him and some kids talk to Onishi and ask questions. And during the summer, Kawasaki had this space-themed uniform. They did a collaboration with the comic artist who did the famous manga Space Brothers. And it's all these very unique things that you wouldn't get at every other stadium. Todoroki has a track, and it's an ugly track, but how many tracks have F1 cars doing laps on them? It's pre-match entertainment. It's just, these are all these things. They had Godzilla kick out the first ball a couple years ago. Godzilla in the costume taking penalty kicks. Like, you can't beat that. These clubs, they don't have the gigantic promotional budgets of American sports teams, and they aren't able to automatically draw the kinds of crowds that Premier League clubs do, or that like big clubs like Barcelona do week in, week out. So they have to be creative, and that leads to some very interesting things.
Yeah, and it seems like they really are all about the fans and making it an event, not just a football match, but an event for just anyone to go to, even if you're not really into football a ton.
The Japanese clubs are very good at drawing in new fans and not just turning them into one-time fans, but trying to figure out how to turn them into repeat fans. The league has become very good in these last couple of years at really targeted marketing for ticket sales. They have databases now that the J-League has, and they provide the data with the clubs, and the clubs are using that to figure out how to say like, well, this is how we get families to come back. This is how we get female fans to come back. These are the kinds of events and the kind of marketing copy that appeals to them. You talk to female fans and you say, well, if you are a Tokyo supporter, come out to Osaka. You'll get to eat great food, you'll get to see a cool game, you'll get to experience all this sort of stuff that's tangential to the match itself. But it's part of the match day atmosphere. If you're an Arsenal fan and you're going to Manchester City, like you're taking the train or you're driving, you're watching the match and you're going home. In Japan, where every city is relatively convenient to each other in terms of travel time and distance, and there's a really great public transportation network, including both rail and air routes, it's easy for fans to go and spend 2 nights in Nagasaki or Fukuoka or Sapporo or Sendai and make a weekend out of it.
Now, I also understand that they've borrowed some fan culture, though, from Europe and South America, especially in the stands.
I think supporter culture is another one of those things where I could go off on a tangent for hours and hours, as long as I've talked about mascots today. But you have to remember that when the J-League started in 1993, there wasn't a supporter culture. There wasn't a fan culture. So what did all of these fans do? They looked at the leagues and the competitions and the clubs they knew. And that was European clubs, that was South American clubs, Brazilian, Argentine, English, German, Italian especially, Spanish, Dutch, and those are the fan cultures that inspired Japanese supporter culture and mixed together with the sort of corporate organized fan culture that you could already see in the JSL, the predecessor to the J League, and in Japanese baseball, for example, where you have these organized cheering sections with a clear hierarchy and organization, and everyone knows what they're singing. And so that's why you get clubs where the fans are singing for 90 minutes, and it's all very organized and structured. But if you listen to the melodies, these are songs that are being sung in Brazil, in Argentina, in Italy, and each club has this sort of distinct flavor where Shimizu S-Pulse, for example, has a lot of Brazilian rhythms, and they do a samba if they win after the match, and FC Tokyo sings You'll Never Walk Alone. Gamba Osaka, because of their Italian influence early on, they have sort of a lot of songs that like Inter or Milan fans will sing. And all of that combines with Japanese pop culture that inspires a lot of chants and songs. And so you've got this really glorious mix of all these different football cultures in Japan, of all places.
So is it weird now when you go to a match outside of Japan?
I mean, it is weird. I feel like as an American, I have the background in watching sports that sort of prepares me. Like, I have a certain expectation of what watching a game is, and that, in a way, helped me adjust to the Japanese style. But then when you go to England and you see, well, this is how English fans behave, or you go to Italy and you see this is how Italian fans behave, it's different from Japan. And I think that a lot of supporters take their fan culture not maybe a bit for granted, but they just sort of assume that this is the way to do it. And I think the J League shows that there's not only are there a lot of different ways to do it, but if you don't take yourself as seriously, you can enjoy just about anything.
Is there a story or experience that you've had that kind of epitomizes maybe the J League fan culture?
There's this girls rock band called Shishamo, and they're all from Kawasaki, and they gone to games as a kid. They've used the stadium as a setting for the music videos, and they played a halftime show once, and the supporters actually use one of the songs they sing is based on one of their hits, and so they had the supporters like sing them in and sing that anthem, and then they started like playing. It's stuff like that, and you know the Super Cup. Yeah, with like the mascots and with the food trucks, like it's also peak J League. The fact that there's a meetup of fans whose hobby it is to Photoshop J League uniforms onto anime characters and print those onto flags, like that's just as J League as it gets. And it's nerdy and it's dumb and it's fun as long as you don't take it too seriously. And even if you do take it seriously, it's fun. And I think that's sort of what the J League is about, because you get to experience all of that and then some amazing football. I know that no foreign fan who has come to Japan and watched a game that I've talked to has ever been disappointed by the experience. And I think that's sort of, I hope that's the takeaway, that if you come to a J League game, you'll have fun. And that's the bottom line.
You can stay up to date on all things Japanese football with Dan Orlowitz in the Japan Times. Music has been provided by Poddington Bear and Celestial Aeon. This episode was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend.